He walked into a forest at 18 with a backpack, a borrowed GoPro, and zero experience building anything, and didn't fully walk back out until 6 years later. His name is Erik Grankvist, a young Swede who chose the wilderness over the world his generation was supposed to want, and who spent more than half a decade building a life from scratch in the forests of Sweden, with nothing but hand tools and sheer repetition. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand not just what he built out there, but what those 6 years quietly built inside him, and why the story the internet told about Erik Grankvist was only part of the truth. There are cities that can hold a person. Stockholm was not that city for Erik Grankvist. He grew up there, in the capital, surrounded by the ordinary architecture of a Swedish teenager's life. School, friends, routines, and a future that looked exactly like everyone else's. From the outside, nothing was wrong. He had people around him. He was smart enough to get through school without incident. He followed the pattern. But internally, something never settled. Erik has described that period in his own words, and the words he chose were not dramatic. They were quiet and specific. He said he didn't connect with people. He said he was looking for something bigger in life. That kind of restlessness, the low-grade kind that has no obvious cause, is actually the harder kind to explain. There's no single event to point to, no crisis, just a persistent sense of misalignment between the life in front of you and the life that feels right. What saved him from just drifting through that feeling, the way most people do, was his grandfather. Åke Nielsen was not a famous man. He was the kind of person who knew how wood behaved in different temperatures, how to read a forest for useful timber, and how to build something that would still be standing after he was gone. He introduced Erik to Swedish nature early, and to traditional craftsmanship, the old arts, as Erik would later describe them. The kind of knowledge that doesn't get passed down through YouTube tutorials or school curriculums, but through proximity, repetition, and time spent working alongside someone who already knows. That knowledge planted something in Erik. He didn't know yet what to do with it. He was still 17, still in Stockholm, still feeling like the city's version of a future wasn't built for him. Then, one evening, he watched a documentary, and everything changed in the specific, irreversible way that only a few things in a person's life actually do. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. The film was called Alone in the Wilderness. It was made in 2004, but the footage it used was shot in the 1960s by a man named Dick Proenneke, an American naturalist who built a log cabin alone in the Alaskan wilderness when he was 51 years old, using hand tools, filming everything himself with a 16mm camera. Proenneke was not young when he did it. He had no social media, no audience, no monetization strategy. He built the cabin because he wanted to, because the wilderness called to him, and because he believed a person could still live that way if they chose to. The footage he left behind was proof. For most people who watched that documentary, it was inspiring in the way that a lot of things are inspiring, briefly, pleasantly, and without consequence. For Erik Grankvist, it was something else entirely. He was 17 years old, already carrying that feeling of not quite fitting into the world he'd been handed. And suddenly here was a man on screen demonstrating that the world could be rebuilt from scratch if a person was willing to do the work. Not metaphorically, literally, with an axe and a saw and enough patience to keep showing up. Erik spent months after that night planning. He researched timber framing. He studied old Swedish construction methods. He talked to his grandfather. He identified land, his grandparents' land, forested, remote enough for the purpose. He thought about tools, about seasons, about what it would actually take to follow through on an idea that most people would dismiss as a phase. He graduated high school in the summer of 2019. He was 18 years old. He packed a backpack with basic hand tools. He picked up the GoPro he'd received as a birthday gift. He said goodbye to his family, and he walked into the forest on his grandparents' land in the mountains of Sweden, set the camera on a tripod, and felled his first tree. He had no previous experience in building, gathering materials, or filming. He said so himself, plainly, without apology. What he had instead was the thing Proenneke had, a willingness to solve every problem that showed up, even when no one was there to help him solve it. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. The first years were documented in the way you'd expect from a teenager who taught himself to film. Imperfectly, practically, without artifice. Erik set up his camera, worked, and let the footage capture what was actually happening rather than what looked impressive. He felled trees with an axe and a handsaw. To move the massive logs across rough terrain to his build site, he rolled them over smaller logs, 1 foot at a time, the same method his ancestors would have used, because it was still the most effective option available without machinery. He built his own sawhorses. He split logs using a hand-carved wooden mallet and wedges he made himself. The work was not cinematic in the conventional sense. There were no highlight reels, no dramatic reveal shots with swelling music. What the camera captured was just a young man, alone, doing extraordinarily difficult physical work across consecutive days, weeks, months, and then years. He dug a stone foundation by hand. He fitted each log into the walls with careful notched joinery. He cut windows and doors. He sealed the roof against the Swedish winter using clay and birch bark, materials he sourced from the land around him, the way Scandinavian builders had been doing for centuries. Across the seasons, fall into winter, winter into spring, spring into another summer, two things changed visibly on camera. The cabin rose from cleared ground into a standing structure, and Erik Grankvist, who had started this project as a boy, became someone else. His body changed. He leaned out, his hair grew long. He moved differently, not with the self-consciousness of a teenager, but with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned that unnecessary motion cost energy, and energy out here was finite. He got a dog. He called him Bar. The upgrade from his birthday GoPro to better camera equipment showed in the footage quality. The Swedish wilderness around his build site came through clearly. Owls, kit foxes, mornings where the light through the birch trees looked like something from a painting. He said in his own description of the work, "It was a long story of hard work, pain, cold, making many, many mistakes, and figuring out how to solve problems all alone by trial and error." 3 years into the project, the cabin was complete enough to move in. And that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around him saw coming. Erik had been posting clips throughout the build, individual videos, short documentations of specific phases, felling trees, laying stone, framing walls. The channel was growing, slowly, in the way that niche content grows before an algorithm decides it's the right moment. Then, in 2022, Erik released his 27th video. It was 2 hours long. It was titled 1 Year Alone in Forest of Sweden, Building Log Cabin Like Our Forefathers. It showed, in one continuous edited piece, the entire arc of the first year's construction. No voiceover, no narration, no talking to the camera, just the work, the wilderness, and the transformation of empty land into the beginning of a home. The video found an audience in a way that can't fully be predicted or explained. It passed 10 million views, then 20, then 30. At the time of this script, it is approaching 33 million views. Erik's subscriber count, which had been building gradually, accelerated sharply. The channel crossed 600,000 subscribers, then 1 million, then 1.5. The comments section became its own document of what the video did to people. Viewers wrote about watching it after long shifts, about watching it when they couldn't sleep, about watching it when they were trying to figure out what they were supposed to do with their lives. One pattern appeared repeatedly, people saying that something about watching a young man build something real and physical and lasting, in silence, had helped them with anxiety in a way that they couldn't quite articulate. The appeal was not really about log cabins. It never was. It was about competence, about the proof that a person could start with nothing, no experience, no roadmap, no guarantee of success, and build something real through sheer accumulation of effort. That idea resonated with something a lot of people were quietly looking for, especially in the years following the pandemic, when the distance between screens and meaning had become something a lot of people were trying to close. What the comments kept asking, though, was something different. And here's the answer they never got, until now. From the moment the channel started gaining real traction, a version of the same question surfaced in the comments, in Reddit threads, in media articles written about Erik's project. How alone was he, really? It was not a hostile question, for the most part. It was a practical one. People who watched the videos noticed things. Clean clothing that suggested access to laundry at some point. A tractor visible briefly in early footage, which Erik himself acknowledged, noting he would have preferred a horse. The fact that the land belonged to his grandparents, not a wilderness he claimed independently. The awareness that 18-year-olds in Sweden don't generally vanish completely into the forest, without some form of family support nearby. One writer compared it to Thoreau, who famously wrote Walden about living simply and alone in the woods, while his mother did his laundry and neighbors brought him food. The parallel wasn't meant to be cruel. It was meant to be honest about the difference between a genuine experiment in self-reliance and the mythology that forms around it. Erik never claimed he was a complete hermit. His channel bio was always clear that he maintained contact with family. He described the land as his grandparents'. He talked openly about learning from his grandfather. The mythology was built around his content by an audience hungry for a purer version of the story, and the content by design didn't contradict it. The reality, when you look at it clearly, is actually more interesting than the mythology. What Erik did was not survive the wilderness alone from scratch. What he did was choose a different kind of life than the one his generation was handed, and then follow through on that choice for 6 years, learning real skills, doing real physical work, building something that stands in the real world. The gaps between the ideal and the actual don't diminish that. They make it human. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. In December 2025, Erik Grankvist published a video titled 7 Years Alone in the Wilderness, Full Story. He was 25 years old. The cabin was complete. The lifestyle he had imagined at 17 was, by his own account, finally achieved. The video was the most reflective piece of content he had ever released, a full accounting of not just the construction timeline, but the internal arc of the person doing the constructing. The description he wrote for it was spare, as his writing always is. After 6 years, his dream log cabin and lifestyle had finally been achieved. But, he noted, it was not an easy journey. What the full story video made clear was something that the individual build videos, by their nature, couldn't capture: the cost. Not financial cost, the cost of choosing a life defined by isolation, physical hardship, and the complete absence of external validation. No boss to tell you you're doing well, no colleagues to share the weight, no social environment to orient yourself within. Just the work, the weather, and whatever you can sustain inside your own head across 6 Swedish winters. The person who emerged from that process was not simply the same teenager with more skills. He described a change that went deeper than capability, a different relationship with time, with discomfort, with the meaning of slow progress. The discipline required to keep showing up to a multi-year physical project alone, with no external accountability, rewires something in a person's orientation toward difficulty. He also emerged with a clearer understanding of what he'd actually been searching for at 17, when he described himself as lost. It wasn't the wilderness specifically. It wasn't even the cabin. It was the experience of building something, the proof, laid down year by year, that he could take a problem that had no solution yet and stay with it until it did. His viewers received messages from people crediting his videos with helping them through anxiety and a lack of purpose. That pattern makes sense now. What they were watching was not escapism. It was a demonstration that slowness and difficulty and physical reality are not obstacles to a meaningful life. They are, for some people, the only path to one. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Here is something the mythology of Erik Grankvist consistently underestimates: the scale of what he built financially and the fact that none of it was the original goal. Third-party analysis of his channel's performance places his estimated net worth at roughly $2 million, with annual earnings in the range of $500,000. These are estimates, not figures Erik has confirmed. But the shape of his commercial operation is visible and documentable. He launched Grankvist Outdoors, an online store selling handmade wood products, cutting boards, shelves, custom pieces built by hand in the same tradition he learned from his grandfather. The store is an extension of the craft, not a departure from it. He didn't pivot to merchandise when the channel grew. He made things with his hands and then sold them. The logic was consistent from the beginning. He became a brand ambassador for Revolution Race, a Swedish outdoor clothing company. He has a paid YouTube membership channel, where subscribers get access to content that doesn't reach the main feed. He took on a sponsorship with Surfshark, the VPN company, whose code appears in his April 2025 video about building an outdoor kitchen at the cabin. The outdoor kitchen is the current chapter. After 6 years of building the primary structure, the log cabin that started everything, Erik is now expanding. The sauna came first, then outbuildings, now the kitchen. The property is developing the way properties develop when someone has both the time and the skills to keep building, one project at a time. What none of his early videos suggested was that the boy who walked into the forest to escape a life that didn't fit him would, by 25, have built one of the most commercially successful niche channels in European outdoor content. He has 1.6 million subscribers, nearly 940,000 Instagram followers, deals with major outdoor and tech brands. He often makes a point of saying the income came as a consequence of the story, not as a starting point. The goal was the life he wanted. Everything else followed. One phone call, one conversation, or in this case, one night watching a documentary about a man with an axe in Alaska. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. Here is the last thing worth saying about Erik Grankvist, and it is the thing his 33 million views represent most accurately. He did not go viral because people wanted to move to the Swedish wilderness. He went viral because a significant number of people, watching a young man build something real with his hands across multiple years of genuine effort, felt something they had been struggling to locate in the rest of their lives. He receives messages regularly from viewers who tell him the videos help them with anxiety, with stress, with a feeling of drift and purposelessness. He doesn't present himself as a therapist, doesn't claim to have answers, doesn't moralize about screens or cities or modern life. He just cuts wood and shows the footage. But the effect is consistent enough to be worth examining. What those viewers are responding to, when they describe feeling calmer after watching Erik work in silence for an hour, is something clinical researchers have a name for: the restoration of directed attention. The experience of watching slow, purposeful, physically grounded work allows the kind of diffuse, anxious mental chatter that defines modern life to quiet down, even briefly. Erik Grankvist, without intending to, built a mental health resource watched by tens of millions of people and monetized by none of them. He built a cabin, yes. He built a business. He built a version of himself that the 17-year-old in Stockholm couldn't have imagined. Not because the transformation was radical, but because it was earned, piece by piece, the same way the cabin was built. And what he found at the end of 6 years, at 25, describing the journey in full for the first time, was the thing he went looking for when he packed that backpack and walked into the trees. He found that it's still possible to start with nothing, to build something that lasts, to do it alone, imperfectly, with the tools you actually have. That idea has 33 million views and counting, because it turns out a lot of people needed to see proof. The real story of Erik Grankvist is not about a log cabin. It's about what happens when a person takes the thing they're searching for seriously enough to actually pursue it. For years, in silence, through cold and failure, and the absence of anyone telling them they're on the right track. He's 25 now. The cabin is finished. The outdoor kitchen is underway. He has nearly 2 million subscribers across his channels, a handmade products business that reflects the same values he started with, and a full story video that, for the first time, puts everything he's learned into words. The next chapter of Erik Grankvist's life is already visible in the footage. More building, more expansion, more documentation of what it looks like to stay committed to a life someone else couldn't have designed for you. So here's the question this story leaves behind, and it's one worth sitting with. Erik Grankvist was 17, feeling lost, and chose to build something rather than wait for direction. Most people in that position wait. Would you have walked into the forest, or is that kind of commitment something you think very few people are actually built for? Let me know in the comments below.